very empowering, right? And I just remember thinking about like, what would these people say? What if we could give like hear what like about the resiliency that must be embedded in these people's lives. Um, Later, I got to fulfill that in some way. Like I'm very interested in like kind of combining the old and the new. And when I discovered this AR augmented reality app that enabled, to use your device to scan an image and give voice back to a sitter, I was like, oh, I'm sort of fulfilling that dream in some ways. I'm kind of like putting that into practice. And then just one more, when I was in grad school at the University of New Mexico, as a grad student there, you have to sort of do this public presentation of your work, and you're sort of putting your committee together, right? And so the professors are chosen for you, and they do it as a very public, kind of almost a performative thing. And I was very nervous. I was putting all my work up. I'd like, I was excited because I had worked really hard. And I turned around, and the room was filled with all of these young, like native art kids. And I was like, what happened? It was like this transformation. And Melanie Yazzie, who's this Dene printmaker who's now at UC Boulder, she was teaching printmaking at IAIA, and she had like trucked all her students down, in part just to see my like presentation, and it was so moving, like and it transformed the dialogue, right? The professors kind of slunk back in their seats, and like, she like indigenized this space, and that was incredibly profound for me. And then later on, I ended up teaching at IAIA, so some stories.
I know, I love them all. They're great. We love listening to the stories. Speaking of stories, I might have mentioned this earlier, but there are Q&A interviews, blog stories on our website where you can hear more or read more conversation with everyone here. And on that note, in one of those interviews, there was a comment, Ilegvak, in that conversation that you had that stuck with me that I wanted to ask a little bit more about today. And your comment was about this idea of Indigenous thought and Indigenous thinkers and the importance of more visibility for Indigenous thinkers. And it really got my wheels turning and thinking about how we often think of art as the tangible, right? It is the tangible thing. It is the product that we produce. It is the final deliverable, if you will. But there's so much beneath that. Indigenous artists are thinkers. You all have these phenomenal philosophies, drawing upon ancestral teachings, ancestral philosophies, your own lived experience. And so I absolutely like that, really resonated with me, just having opportunity to hear from artists, to hear your words, like you're all so brilliant. And so I'm curious about, each of you are obviously, you're just so well versed in the meaning and purpose behind your art. But who are the teachers? I'm curious, like, who are some of those Indigenous thought leaders and thinkers who influenced you? Is it home community? Is it movement leaders? Can you tell us who some of those Indigenous thinkers are who influenced your own philosophies and understandings of the world? And since that came from you, Ilegvak, that inspiration for that question, maybe you can start.
Yeah, go Anna. So when I was about 8, I had the privilege, again, so filling in the background about being raised in Tlingit Ani, Tlingit land, being raised outside of my culture by a white single mother. But I had the privilege and honor to go to Dog Point Fish Camp, which was run by the Littlefield family. And it was run in like a structure of like a traditional camp. And so we would get together and fish and harvest salmon and then process it and put that salmon back to the community. And I couldn't believe that we could do this. I couldn't believe people could like live this way. Like it was like heaven on earth, to work together and to harvest food and be in nature and camp. And it taught me a lot. And one of the things that was taught very early on was about respecting elders. And just not respecting elders, but also just respecting life and respecting food. And so that was something that was really foundational to me. Also, my daduk, which is uncle, Mike Williams Sr., he ran the Iditarod for 15 years and for sobriety. He lost 6 of his brothers, including my dad, all alcohol-related deaths. And so watching that kind of from afar, and then also my interactions with him as an adult, and seeing kind of how he is a leader and advocate for Native rights and sovereignty and food, and that like closeness that I have with him, because he's kind of like the closest thing besides myself to my dad. And so I really enjoy like fishing with him and hanging out in general. And his daughter, Sheila, said one of the sweetest things to me was, I think my dad likes you so much because he gets his brother back. And so I think I watch him, I watch other elders. There's a lot of people in my life. There's an elder I'm working with who's Atna, Athabaskan, Wilson Justin, and doing some work and writing with him in particular about climate change. Yeah, a lot of elders, and then there's a lot of amazing writers and thinkers right now that are Indigenous, especially in the academic realm, and reading like Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and just being kind of blown away with, I don't know what the right word is, because alternative history is not the right word, but I guess speak a truth that hasn't been spoken, and being able to do that in this era, I think, is a gift. And so that's something that I think is really exciting, is that there's a lot of amazing thinkers and philosophers and artists. And I guess I would say, in closing, when you talk about knowledge, something I think about too is, you're talking about like in the material, is that knowledge is something that is embodied. And so I think about that of when I learn, what does it feel like when I learn? And it usually feels really good. And it's usually like a full body sensory experience, just not like in my physical body and just not in my brain, but also in my spirit and in my emotion. And so I think that that's something that art helps kind of transcend or communicates, is taking ancient wisdom and knowledge and ways of being and walking on this earth and interacting with each other, and all that skill set and the material that has also been there along that journey throughout time, and then kind of combining that both in this ancient way, but also in a contemporary and perhaps futuristic way as well, to kind of come into this material space.
Thank you. And Will, are there Indigenous thinkers, philosophers that have really shaped your worldview? Maybe you could tell us who they are and what some of those philosophies were.
I mean, the first person I think of is Shimayoja, May Big Horse, my maternal aunt, right, who sort of raised me as well, and my grandmother, Martha City, and just how they kind of, they were the matriarchs. They kept the family together. They kept food on the table. It could have been the incredible herds of sheep, or the fields along Munkopi Wash down below Tuba in the Curly Valley. I think some of my work is about how much change has occurred in such a short amount of time. And I often think about how May was able to sort of sustain an extended family through the sheep and the fields, and in only a few generations, or I guess one generation really in some ways, if you're just thinking about her to me, Tuba has sort of become a food desert, but then there's, I think on another level, like that knowledge is still very much present and embodied in the people who are around now. So I don't know. I think about opportunity, I guess, and just in terms of photography, hallucinogeny, her incredible work, her ability to sort of insert herself and sort of Indigenous photography into all of these spaces, or someone like Jean Quick-to-See Smith. I've had the honor of working pretty closely with Jennifer Danette Dale down at the University of New Mexico, who was, the first PhD, Dene PhD in history. And I got to invite her to write an essay about Astan Klogi, who was her great-great-great-grandmother, and the partner of Manuelito, who was one of the principal chiefs, like during the Long Walk period, right? So I don't know. I think Jennifer Danette in particular, and like her mentorship of like an incredible cohort of like Indigenous thinkers, like Melanie Yazzie or Nick Estes, who've come through like her program, is someone who's particularly, I think, impactful in that realm. Y'all at who are leading up the Indian Collective, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great list. And coming from a variety of different backgrounds and disciplines, from academia to photography, and it really just kind of shows the interconnectedness, the deep connection between Indigenous thought and art, and you all as thinkers. And so now to you, Jackie, who has really influenced your work? Who are some of those Indigenous philosophers, teachers, thinkers who come through in your work?
That's it's such a hard question for me, because I don't really was great with school or learning. Learning was really hard for me. Just even like learning how to read, it's still hard for me. And my English teacher in high school really pushed me. She didn't push me to learn English or like write, but she saw my art, and out of all the people that kept pushing me to continue to make my art was my English teacher, Miss Bradley, which really helped, because she was the first person when Standing Rock was happening. She's like, you need to come home and talk to our kids, because they don't know nothing. We're in such an isolated area that's like a seaside cliff town in Crescent City, right next to my res, and it's just so isolated because of it's so hard to get to. And so to talk to kids, like kids have been the biggest inspiration, because when I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of like options for education. We had one high school for the whole county, and it was just like a lot of the parents, because we have a hard meth problem in my hometown, so a lot of kids were left to their own devices, and our whole young generation was just like wild and out. So it's just recently I've been finding people that have been really bringing me up and reclaiming my culture, my knowledge for my culture, and it's just been such a beautiful learning process. So the youth have been really lifting me up. They really showed me to keep going, to keep showing up, because they need this, like how my younger self needed this. So I'm really thankful that Creator gave me a daughter that's been really pushing me. She's like my biggest inspiration, and every time I look at her, I'm like, hey, I can't give up because of her. And it's just really the youth. Like, I wish I had more elders that I could reference to and say thanks to, but a lot of my elders have passed on. And like, I always think about my grandpa, because when I went to Standing Rock, I was like, I'm going to go be with all the other warriors. And the last thing he told me was like, there is no more warriors. We're all dead. There's none of us left. So I think about that a lot. And I'm like, I don't want to tell my daughter that. Sorry. I just think about the kids a lot. Like, is she going to have salmon when she's older? Are the redwoods still going to be there when the fires are done? But yeah, it's the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And the youth and our young people are thinkers that inspire our work too. So yes, I absolutely agree. It's beautiful. Well, it's been great hearing, what is beneath your work, the thinking. So thinking into the future now, thinking of, like I know with artists and creators, you're always thinking about that next project, right? Like sometimes you start one and don't quite finish it, and you start 5 more, and you got all these things going, all these ideas that are constantly, being inspired by the world around you. And so one of the things that has been really an honor to witness as a part of Indian Collective with this Radical Imagination program is to see and to hear from you all about how you radically imagine the future, how you envision that better world where we all thrive, where our people are healed, where we're self-actualized. And so I'd love to kind of tap into that imagination and that vision and taking off restrictions. And I'd love to hear if any of you guys have dream projects that without any financial restrictions, time restrictions, like go to the furthest, maybe you've already thought of those. Because those obviously are issues and restrictions and barriers for us, right? There's all kinds of barriers, but we're in the presence of these phenomenal minds. Like we love to hear, like, what is that dream project? Do you guys have one? Do you have a dream project? And would love to hear that from you guys. And so you guys can go in any order, whoever feels called. Share with us your dream project. I see the wheels turning, maybe even hear them, see some smoke. So, all right. So yeah, what's your dream project? We'll go with you first, Will.
Okay. I don't know. I tend to do these really long form projects that I've been sort of doing for a long time. I don't know. I'm really invested in this Connecting the Dots project, and I think that this has just sort of given me a opportunity to build a platform to grow from. I'd love to see this app become something that's very sort of used and understood, and expand on that so that it becomes like a place where all kinds of information can be shared and sort of propagated, I guess, in relation to this issue. Boy, dream projects. That's a hard one for me, because I do tend to kind of settle into these things and continue to work on them for a long time. So I have like 4 main projects that I do.
Yeah, they constantly evolve. Those are the nice things about long projects too, is you could constantly bring new life into them. Jackie, do you have dream projects? Like, we see new stuff coming out all the time. Your stickers, your characters, oh my gosh, are amazing. So yeah, without restriction, without any limitations, what are one of your dream projects?
I have 2 we're working on right now. Res Days, I'm always throwing it out there because it's like, I just really want to see healthy Indigenous romances. It's so hard seeing my sisters just in all these like relationships that like, I know these men are beautiful and strong and capable. It's just that all these traumas we carry, and like, how do we go into frontline movements? How do we fight for land back while fighting for our love and our families? Because I always see so many single moms or single dads, and I'm like, that's not how it should be. Like, so Res Days, I'm always throwing it out there because it's more than just a comic. It's more of like a collaborative project. I want to hear people's stories on like what love means to them, what land back means to them. And we're also working on an Acorn Spirit series, which is just for the kids, like cute little stories on like these little spirits just being in our lives that we may not see them, but they're always there. So those are 2 projects I've been working on currently, but there might be some more next week, so I never really know.
So currently in the dream, that's amazing. And healthy Indigenous love, decolonized Indigenous love is the dream for real. So yeah, absolutely.
Love back.
Yeah, decolonize love back. All right, so Ilegvak, what about yours? What is your dream project, your dream work without restrictions?
Thank you. That's a really, I think, powerful question, because also your question was about like kind of moving beyond, like, forget how you exactly phrased it, but if we could kind of reimagine things, what would that be like? So think about an interview that Dr. Kim Tallbear gave in All My Relations on one of the episodes. And she said, you can't get rid of one system without replacing it with another. And I think, our ancestors and us have understood that in the sense of our systems and way of being replaced forcefully. But I think we also have so much knowledge that can help this colonial system and structure that is literally like cannibalizing everything it can and what sustains all life, which is insanity. And so there's so much knowledge that can replace that, which is also kind of challenging because we also have to kind of do the process, I guess, of understanding what colonization is and what it has done and what it's doing in order to kind of replace that system with these other systems that have been around since time immemorial and are based on reciprocity and a different set of value systems. And so I will take a moment to address it on a personal level of like a project where I'm spending a lot of time exercising, praying, meditating, being in nature, going to sweats, really trying to heal various traumas throughout my life, and not just my life, but throughout many generations that I've, inherited. And so I think within that, going to talking about replacing a system, because to me it seems like it's pretty clear that the capitalistic colonial system is collapsing because it's unsustainable, and it's collapsing around us, which can be very scary, but also quite beautiful and needed. And so my hope is that we don't end up being into this like kind of apocalyptic future that they love to give awards to movies and books who portray this desolate future and ignore people who are working so hard at trying to prevent that desolate future. And so my thought is that through our healing our own traumas, that's also where we kind of build the foundation, setting that foundation of love and connection in place as these other structures are crumbling. And then hopefully are then in turn like joined. But more specifically, as far as like a project, I'm working on writing a book about the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which is a quite complex thing in itself to try to talk about. In short, it's termination policy, that's what the federal government called this era of Indian policy. For those that don't know, they actually called it termination policy. And so the idea was to terminate tribes and tribal sovereignty. And I think that was officially on the books until like the 80s. And so Senator Ted Stevens literally was writing termination policy as an aide, ended up writing the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which they called a fair and just deal. And so what that did is it was in 1971, and it took the land and like the resources and the settlement money, and it put it to Native corporations, not to the tribal governments. And so it's a strategy of divide and conquer, because now we're fighting amongst ourselves over resources, over systems of how we take care of our people. And so it's coming to a head in various ways in Alaska right now. But I think it's something important to just try to explain what the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is. And so to understand how it was an act of genocide, how it's an act of termination policy. And then once we understand that, then I think we can kind of go beyond of like, okay, what do we want to do now? And so I've thought about this in kind of your question of what's this future that we actually want? Because so much of time that I spend as an artist and an activist, I notice I spend so much time and energy on things that I actually don't want. Like I don't actually want to write a book about ANCSA. like I would like to help to kind of create the future that moves beyond this fixation of continuing to talk about colonization. But I think that that's also where the challenge is that we also have to talk about it while we're decolonizing to also indigenize, and then in going back to kind of ending it with Dr. Kim Tallbear's words of, replacing one system with another. And so I think that that's where that challenge comes from of kind of like, how do we do both? And how do we hold that space? And I don't know how I'm gonna fund the book. So that's part of also why I share it. Go on.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for sharing your dreams. And I think for the audience and for everyone here in our own ways to think about the importance and the responsibility of continuing to imagine that future and dream and kind of hold that duality, like you said, of wanting to kind of imagine a future liberated of worrying about decolonization, worried about the problem, worried about resistance and fighting, where we can just exist. Exist without the resistance is really the dream in a lot of different ways. But we all have to, in our own worlds and our own homes, reflect on that. And that's what this grant is really seeking to fund, seeking to lift up and highlight, is that radical imagination, and how artists such as yourselves are taking that inspiration, that love for your people, that pain, sometimes that anger to resist, and turning that into something, turning it into a solution, taking action, creating a product that will inspire people, that will tell stories to the masses, so that we can all see that we're all capable of that too. We're all capable of going home to our communities and learning from the thinkers, learning from the Indigenous thought leaders, whether it's our parents, whether it's ceremony holders or bundle keepers or language speakers, or our own children who have that decolonized, untraumatized love that they can share and inspire us with. And so it was beautiful hearing all of your stories too, and your dreams, and really hope that on your paths and your journeys that your dreams continue to be supported and that your work continues to reach the masses. Because before colonization, art was viewed very differently. It was something that we all did, right? It wasn't something limited to artists. It was something we all did every day. Every day as we were making things with our hands or singing songs or telling stories, it was accessible to everyone, and it still absolutely is. And so, yeah, I'm just really moved and inspired by everything that each of you has shared. And I do want to make sure that we leave some time for Q&A. And so I just wanted to, we're going to go around one more time for a final, set of reflections about, it's two parts. And so first thing too is what are your hopes and aspirations for the world of Indigenous art, just in general? So broadly, what are your hopes and aspirations for the world of Indigenous art? And then if you could just follow that up with, how can people support your art today? So hopefully you could remember, two-part question. Not always the easiest, but yeah, we'll start with you, Jackie.
My biggest dream is that there should be Indigenous art in everyone's hands, especially the kids. I feel like kids always, everyone's like, the kids, it's for the kids. I'm like, well, how come all these kids are not having art in their hands? They should never be charged if a kid comes up like, I got you stuff here. And that the best way to do that is support the youth. Like, when people always message me like, hey, can you do this campaign for me? I'm like, I'm a Yurok woman. I've never been to your homelands. Hire the youth in your area that, there's so much creative youth. They should be the ones getting these opportunities, not me. I don't know these issues, but these kids that grew up in it, that know everything, that can tell you every back road on the res, those are the kids that deserve to be creating and have to be uplifted. They're the ones that are going to be living in this world. So if you guys need artists, support them youth, get them to get their creative ways going, and not just pay them, buy the art supplies for them and their friends. They got homies that create too. So that's what I always want to say is get them kids going.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we'll go down the line, Ilegvak. So just broadly, and this is similar to the last question, but what are your hopes and dreams for the world of Indigenous art, and how can we support your work?
So I served on a selection committee maybe this spring, and it was quite challenging to figure out how to select artists to get awarded in a program, because just everyone was deserving. And so that's something that comes to my mind. And almost brings tears to me with your question of what do I want to see with Indigenous artists, is I want to see them not struggle. I want to see them thrive. I want to see them be embraced with the love that they give to the world, to the sacrifice that they go through to continue to do what they're doing. And it's really hard. Like on one hand, we do kind of operate in realms of kind of elitism and privilege. On the other hand, we also operate in realms of incredible poverty and struggle. And for trying to hold and create things that are of such beauty and power and wonder and from our ancestors, and to keep the culture going, to see Indigenous people struggle at that, it's really devastating to me. And so that's what I would like to see, is I would like to see Indigenous artists and culture bearers not struggle, and to have placing of belonging, and to have ease with the work that they do, because it's vitally important. And I think there's people here that know the percentage of philanthropy, American philanthropy in Indian country. Can someone shout that out? Like, that might have changed a little bit.
I think it used to be 0.03% of philanthropic dollars went to Indian country.
Yeah. And so I think that that's something that really, really needs to change, and there is movement, in that changing, but it really needs to change. And I'm going to say something kind of radical, is like, I also think we need to go beyond the point of talking about money at a certain point. Like we need to completely reevaluate our value system. And I think I would like to see a world where, money is not the value system, but healing's the value system. Reciprocity is the value system. Having fresh water and air and food for everyone, and no pollution and no war, be the value system over greed and extraction. So I think it takes each one of us, and as a collective. And I think it also really takes, because people with wealth can donate money, but as long as they're still continuing creating wealth in the same structure that they got it, I don't know how that's really going to be equitable change. And I don't think it's necessarily a benefit for them either, ultimately. But before I get too far on my soapbox, put down the mic.
No, it was great. And you know what? You reminded me of something important. You mentioned culture bearers, and the Radical Imagination Grant supports culture bearers as well. And really, it's such an art to listen to and learn from your elders, your community, to learn those skills, to learn those crafts, and to be able to create them and replicate them. So we also support culture bearers who are doing their traditional arts, retelling their traditional stories, and conveying traditional knowledge from their communities. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, just a point that I wanted to lift up as well. And then we'll close out with you, Will. What are some of your hopes and dreams for the artist community, for the concept of art in Indigenous communities? Moreover, I know you've been doing this a long time, and so so yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective.
I don't know. The one thing I thought about when Ilegvak was talking was how, like, the Radical Imagination Grant actually mandates that you take a percentage of the funds that you're granted, and you use that towards self-care. And whoever came up with that idea is like a genius, I think. I mean, it was probably a collective like movement, but for example, I took some of those dollars or that funding, and my daughter had her Kinalda, like her Dene coming of age ceremony, and just to think that I could be kind of supported in doing that as not only sort of an artist, but just as someone in the community was pretty amazing to me. So I don't know. I would just say, listen to you all. I think you're really doing a great job of laying down the blueprint for the way that it should be, right? And so maybe that process of indigenizing philanthropy is a dream, right? I think one thing, when I was younger as an undergraduate, I was a Mellon fellow, and a Mellon minority undergraduate fellowship is what I got, and it really opened doors and enabled me to focus on research instead of having to deconstruction or something, or demolition during the summers, right? Which was sort of mind-blowing to me. And they tracked us through grad school, and like my cohort, there were 100 PhDs, and I made an argument that an MFA could be in that cohort. So I kind of, opened a space for myself and the other artists who were involved. But, 5 years later, they brought me to New York, the Mellon Foundation in particular. This could be any foundation, but they said, how do we get more Native students to be part of these things? And I was like, well, you have to go to where they're at. You have to meet the people where they are. And I was like, University of New Mexico, it's got one of the highest populations of Indigenous students, like fund it there, because they were only sort of tapping Ivy League institutions at that point. But, I was also like tribal colleges, like go to Diné College or go to, like the Indigenous kind of colleges, use AHEC as a resource to kind of channel this into the communities. And I think they're starting to understand that now and do it, actually. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that things are moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Will. You mentioned something also that I want to point to that reminded me I'd love to point to our Indian Foundation staff. Many of them are here, and they were really instrumental in working hard together in designing the Radical Imagination grant, where your wellness as an artist is prioritized. You are responsible to take a chunk of those funds and take care of yourself. Because in this world of capitalism that moves so fast, where we're constantly producing, creating output, working ourselves to the bone, we don't even take good care of ourselves. And today we call that self-care. And back then our ancestors just did it as balance because they knew that's what we had to do. But I think it is really beautiful and powerful that you lifted up that this particular grant was designed with that in mind. And so I'd love for the Indian Foundation staff who are in the room to just raise your hand and wave and show us where you're at. There's a number of them in here. Just raise your hand. This is the Indian Foundation staff who helped design this particular grant. And with so much intention, they're beautiful matriarchs from their home communities. They're artists themselves, and just do this work with a lot of care and intention. And so they've been sitting there behind the scenes helping, but they made this happen. They really brought this work to light and allowed all of us to, so much of their work and sacrifice and dedication as matriarchs helped to bring us all here together today as well. So thank you all so much. I know that I also wanted to say, to support their work, definitely check out the Indian Collective website, where we do lift up their work, and they're all on social media if you just want to look for them on social media. But beyond supporting them, I think there were some important calls to action here too, to just support art in general, broadly in your own home, and artists, seeing their work, seeing the heart and love that they really pour into what they do. But with that, I just want to, again, say thank you all so much for what you shared. I really enjoyed this conversation with you all. And now I'd love to open up the floor to see if anyone here has any questions for our phenomenal Indigenous thinkers who are here. So any questions for Will, Ilegvak, or Jackie? And I think we'll have a runner take the microphone around here. And so just raise your hand and we'll go around to take a few questions.
Hi, thank you all so much. This has been phenomenal. My question is, I would love your take on the role of public art in re-indigenizing public spaces for you in your personal practice, or what you think about it writ large.
Thank you for my question. My first thought to that is, I think maybe that space needs to be, returned to the people that land was on. Because I think about, like, could that really be Indigenous art or like public art? So I guess, yeah, I think about land back. I think about representation on selection panels and committees too. I had a fellowship convening one that I got, there was an artist there that I befriended, and he was talking about a proposal. I'm gonna just keeping this anonymous, but a proposal in Seattle. And so he put this proposal for, I think, the light rail. And the response was, one, you can't put these figures up there because it's going to scare people. They might think they're going to get mugged or raped. And these figures were of his ancestors. He was putting silhouettes of his native ancestors. And they said, you can't do that because in the subway they might think they're homeless people. So this was literal feedback that this Indigenous artist who was putting a proposal for public art to put in. So as long as that exists, yeah, I guess that just has to be, dismantled, because it's clearly not welcoming, and it's clearly hateful. There's also another artist who's quite well known, and was talking about kind of a same situation of putting a proposal for it, and he goes off the bat, it's just like, I know that I'm not going to get it because there's like no one in the room that understands what I do and understands Indigenous art, and was talking about Indigenous art and we were talking in an airport, and it's just like he was talking about one of it being as one of his favorite art pieces in general, but it was just this pillar, and he's like, it's just a gesture, if even just a gesture, compared to the funding and the space of that. So I guess in closing, my thought is to really examine what is public art, what is public space. Again, nodding back to that initial thought of land back into that, but also like inclusion and diversity, and to think about who is actually the public. Because it's well known that Indigenous people and other people of color and women are not considered fully human. And so that is changing, and that needs to change. But until that happens, I guess there's only a certain public that we're talking about and being represented. Going on.
It depends like how people view public art, because for me, I've seen public art be used so incredibly, and I just want to do a shout out to the incredible artists that are here that have used public art for creative resistance. Arts. If you know, you know. So y'all should definitely apply to the creative resistance track with like IP3's holding one in September. So definitely check IP3 out because they're incredible. They've got me doing art. But I always shout that out because I've seen them take over the street by creating street murals with the ashes of the redwood trees and creating environmentally safe paint with those ashes to create these giant street murals to blockade like Blackwater to make statements, because these wildfires are destroying our ancestral redwood trees. So that's where money should be funding towards like public art. It's like if this art isn't reclaiming or like fighting for the next gen, then I don't even think that's public art to me. I'm like, that's just a waste of finances and materials and space. Like art should be educational in creating a better future. So if the art ain't creating change, then I feel like it's just a waste of money, because we're at a point where it's like we need change. And if it's not change we're getting, then we're wasting time. So it depends on how you view public art. So if it ain't creating change, that's all I gotta say for arts.
I guess I'm much more of a pragmatist in that I've used public art funding to, like, I think, create some of that change you're talking about and have impacts in communities. I did a big project in Tucson, Arizona for 3 years. It was called the Barrio Anita Mural Project. And we really looked at it as an opportunity to sort of like honor and image people from this specific community. You know, like when you drive around a cityscape, you know, who do you see kind of blown up on the billboards? You know, whose images are up there, and how can you transform that and make it empowering for, you know, young people like who can see themselves, or like you know, one of the people that we imaged in our mural, because we did this giant glass photograph that was like a football field long, was Dr. Laura Banks, who like was, you know, an unwed mom who had to drop out of school in Barrio Anita in Tucson. But, you know, she did what she had to do. She went back to school, and she was like, you know, seminal in desegregation in the Tucson Unified School District. And she became sort of the person that we wanted to honor. And, you know, the whole mural became like a series of images of people from that community. And, you know, I don't know, it felt empowering, I think, to that community. We also, like, you know, we were able to kind of take over this fire station in the local community, and it became like the site of, you know, jobs during the summer in an air-conditioned space, or at least swamp coolers, you know, in Tucson. I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential, and I think the idea of figuring out who's on those committees and making them more representative of the communities that should be served is like an important strategic kind of way to go about it from sort of a pragmatist standpoint. I mean, the New Mexico Art and Public Places set up here. A few years ago, I had a friend who was working there, and she told me about this fund. There was like $200,000 just sitting in an account that was meant to go to like Dene artists, right? But it was going to get folded back into the system if it wasn't used. And so I sort of took it upon myself to like make sure that people applied for this grant. And, you know, because I knew this person in that space, we were able to like, you know, get that money into artists' pockets. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a problematic side of it. There's a strategic side of it. But yeah.
One more.
I'll do one more.
First of all, I just want to thank you all so much for being here. I drove from Salt Lake to be here today, and you made it worth every minute of that trip. Even it's a beautiful trip, you know, it's not hard to love. But your presence, your sincerity, and your rawness as artists, as thinkers, as beings is. Thank you. And I do have one question. So, Peter, you were talking earlier about this idea of death and how we tend to not pay attention to it, or to push it under the rug in our society, the society around us. It's not something we talk about, and then I was so moved and just inspired to hear several of you mention this idea of love back. Like, how do we look forward? And then you mentioned at the end that idea of like, we do have to think about our history. We do have to think about the past. We can't just forget the trauma, but like that space in between the trauma and the love, like looking forward to the love through the memory of that trauma, those experiences. Like that is such a powerful place for art. And I feel like there's so much transformative potential in work that both speaks to that love and doesn't try to, you know, use it as a replacement for the past, but actually feed on the past. That's a lot, sorry. But if any of you guys have any thoughts on that, I would be grateful to hear them. Thank you.
I don't know, for me personally, it's like how I survive and negotiate trauma and, you know, sort of understand how to take the lived experience of like being a survivor and putting beauty out into the world. And I don't know, I think artists are particularly good at that as well.
I think one thing I've been doing is a practice of gratitude and really being thankful multiple times a day to Creator and to my ancestors for getting me here. And part of that, I bring this up because I think it kind of touches to what you're talking about, like historical trauma and recognizing that historical trauma. And so recognizing that also of my ancestors, that the sacrifices that they went through and the hardships that they went through in order for me to be here, and to be appreciative of that. And that has kind of reframed things for me as I experience life, to have more gratitude for this gift of life instead of being angry and upset about the pain and the injustice that also comes with this gift of life. And I think that makes that easier, not only in enjoying life and healing, but I feel like that also makes it easier with redressing those issues that need to be addressed. That it has me come from a more grounded place to deal with challenges, and it also has me coming from a more grounded place to deal with joy.
I always look to love, like not romantic love, but just loving life, like loving waking up next to my daughter, next to my husband, waking up, just loving, like breathing. I think it's just so awesome to love, and just like, I don't even know how to explain it. I feel like love is so lost in this world because everyone's just so worried about tomorrow that it's so hard to just love the present, like not just be in it, but loving it. And I always talk about love back because it's so hard, like thinking about we can't even love ourselves. We can't, like, how are we going to love, like, change if we can't even love ourselves? So I'm so hard on the love train. The romance is important too, because like we got to romance ourselves. I look at art as a romantic partner. I always tell my husband, who's not artistic at all, that we're in a throuple with art. Art's taking care of us. Art's our zaddy. So I always throw art out, and love back is like something we got to look inside, because it is breaking a cycle. Love will always conquer like cycles. Oh, I hate the word conquer, but if that's the one way I will use it, is love, because it triumphs so much. At the end of the day, I'm just so thankful, and I just love that Creator let me have this life to be embraced in love. Like, I love my friends so much. Anytime I see my friends for like not 3 months, I'll cry. Like, we just went to an action camp, and I just cried the whole time. Like, who is that girl crying? I feel like we just walked into her high school reunion, which kind of was, but so I definitely say, like, look inside, find that romance for yourself, and love back.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's hear it for our artists. Please put your hands together for our final panel. Thank you to our audience for the great questions and your engagement. And this is actually our last panel for the evening, or for the early part of the day. And we do have about 15 minutes for folks to roam around and check out the art before we have to scoot everyone out so we can transition for our concert. And so just some quick shares about what's still going on. You can talk to the artists. We still got some of the artists here in the house today. You could check out the displays around the room. We have some more artist vendors that are out here and upstairs. And so, yeah, I just want to tell you all, thank you so much for being here, for bringing yourself to this space and listening to our artists. Some really important messages here today, even from some of our earlier panels on Hands in Earth, on bringing your various different mediums to life with your Indigenous teachings, philosophies, and a lot of really great messages about the accessibility of art and the importance of us all to engage in art and whatever that means or looks like to us. And so thank you so much, everyone. I think we have some final words here. And actually, there are a couple more folks that want to share some quick announcements. And so we'll hand it over to our Auntie Gabby, our matriarch of Indian Foundation.
These amazing artists brought incredible messages today, and I just want to thank you all for bringing that. So grateful to be able to be part of this work with you. Yesterday was Jackie's birthday, so we just want to honor that real quickly.
Birthday, Jackie. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone. And like I said, we got about 10-15 minutes left for you to enjoy the space. And then we hope to see you all back here at 6 o'clock for the Radical Imagination Experience concert, where we have Dakota Camacho, our relative from Guam, Radical Imagination artist, who will be doing a performance, Mike Jordan, Frank Juan, and also Marks, who will be premiering their music video, How Long. So thanks so much, everyone.
Hi, everyone. As you're checking out the exhibitions, I want to remind you that tomorrow here at Site Santa Fe, there will be a book signing by Jeffrey Gibson. The event is actually titled Jeffrey Gibson Tea Dance and Book Launch, and it's from 2 to 5, and it includes a DJ and all kinds of fun things. But this is a really important launch of a book that's going to make a big difference in academia and beyond. It's titled An Indigenous Present.